during boarding for my 70th birthday trip to Grand Cayman. The flight attendant leaned over my first-class seat. I expected her to offer me a warm towel or a glass of water. Instead, her hands were visibly shaking, and her face was drained of all color. She leaned in close, pretending to adjust my tray table, and whispered directly into my ear. "Pretend you are feeling sick and leave the plane right now." I chuckled politely, thinking it was some kind of strange airline humor, but she did not smile. She grabbed my wrist, her nails digging sharply into my skin. "Please, I beg you. If you stay on this flight, your life is over." 20 minutes later, everything I knew about my family shattered into a million irreversible pieces. My name is Richard Harrison. For over 40 years, I worked as a senior internal auditor for a major corporate firm based out of Chicago. My entire career was built on a very specific set of skills. I found anomalies. I tracked financial discrepancies. I uncovered the lies that desperate people tried to hide in complex spreadsheets. But there is a cruel irony in life. When you are dealing with your own flesh and blood, your professional instincts tend to go completely blind. 3 years ago, I lost my wife, Patricia. We had been married for 4 decades. After she passed away, my world shrank considerably. The silence in my house was deafening. I thought my son Derek and his wife Monica were the only anchors I had left in this world. Derek is 42 years old, working as a chief financial officer at a prestigious hedge fund in New York. I was incredibly proud of his success. So, when they surprised me with a first-class ticket to Grand Cayman for my 70th birthday, claiming I needed a sunny getaway to relax and heal, I was deeply moved by their generosity. Monica even went out of her way to buy me a beautiful, sleek leather carry-on bag. She packed it for me herself, insisting that I should not lift a single finger for my own birthday trip. I headed to John F. Kennedy International Airport feeling loved. I settled into seat 2A. The leather was soft, the cabin was quiet, and I watched out the large window as the baggage handlers loaded the plane. I felt a rare sense of peace. I even took a picture of my boarding pass and texted it to Derek, thanking him one more time for being such a wonderful, caring son. He replied almost instantly with a heart emoji and a message saying he could not wait to hear all about my relaxing vacation. Then the flight attendant approached. Her name tag read Sarah. At first, she was just moving down the aisle, doing her standard pre-flight safety checks. But when she glanced at her digital passenger manifest and then looked up at my face, she froze completely. I saw a flash of recognition followed immediately by pure terror. She walked away quickly, constantly looking over her shoulder at me. I thought nothing of it at the time. I figured she had just remembered she forgot something in the galley. 5 minutes later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that the boarding doors would be closing in a few moments. That was when Sarah returned. She knelt beside my seat, keeping her head low under the guise of helping me untangle my seatbelt. That was when she delivered the warning that changed my life. "Pretend you are feeling sick and leave the plane right now." I looked down at her, utterly confused. I am a 70-year-old man who just wanted to enjoy a beach vacation. I thought maybe I had misheard her over the hum of the airplane engines. But her eyes were wide, filled with a panic that you simply cannot fake. She gripped my wrist again, harder this time. "Please, I am begging you. Your luggage. They are waiting for you at the airport in Cayman. If you land there, you are going straight to prison. You need to get off this plane immediately." My mind began to race at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Prison, my luggage, Monica had packed that bag for me. Derek had booked this exact flight. My auditor brain, the part of me trained to detect fraud setups and hidden agendas, clashed violently with the heart of a grieving father. A father desperately wants to believe that his only son loves him. But an auditor knows the cold, hard facts. When someone gives you an all-expenses-paid trip to a notorious offshore tax haven and insists on packing your bag for you, something is deeply, deeply wrong. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom once more. Flight attendants prepared doors for departure and cross-check. I had maybe 30 seconds to make a choice. I could ignore the terrified young woman trembling beside my seat and trust the son I had raised. Or I could trust my gut, humiliate myself in front of a cabin full of strangers, and escape. The sweat forming on Sarah's forehead was real. The frantic urgency in her grip was real. And the sudden deafening warning alarms going off in my head were real. I remembered the odd questions Derek had asked me weeks ago about my old banking contacts. I remembered Monica insisting I not bring my own suitcase. The pieces clicked together in my mind, forming a picture too horrifying to accept, but too logical to ignore. I made my choice. I gasped loudly, throwing my head back against the leather seat. I grabbed the center of my chest with both hands and slumped forward against the seatbelt, letting out a strained, agonizing groan. My chest, I gasped, making my voice weak, breathless, and raspy. I cannot breathe. My left arm is going completely numb. Sarah immediately jumped up. She yelled for medical assistance at the top of her lungs, playing her part perfectly. The entire first-class cabin erupted into sudden panic. The head flight attendant rushed over with a portable oxygen tank. Passengers gasped and unbuckled their seatbelts to look. Through the chaos, I heard the captain halt the departure sequence, calling for an emergency medical evacuation. The doors remained open, and I was about to walk away from the life I knew forever. The transition from the plush first-class cabin to the harsh reality of the terminal happened in a blinding blur of shouting voices and heavy footsteps. 2 paramedics practically carried my dead weight down the jet bridge, their gloved hands gripping my arms with professional urgency. The humid airport air slapped my face, providing a stark contrast to the climate-controlled sanctuary I had just escaped. As they strapped my chest onto a motorized medical cart, I risked a single glance back toward the aircraft doors. Sarah stood there, her hands clasped tightly in front of her uniform apron. She gave a barely perceptible, terrified nod before disappearing into the dark shadows of the galley. Her chilling warning echoed violently in my ears, echoing louder than the wailing siren of the cart speeding through the crowded concourse. The airport medical clinic smelled sharply of industrial bleach and stale burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed mercilessly overhead as the medical team transferred my supposedly failing body onto a crinkly paper-lined examination bed. A stern-looking doctor immediately attached cold, sticky electrocardiogram electrodes directly to my bare chest. I had to consciously regulate my rapid breathing, keeping my eyes half closed to maintain the illusion of an elderly man clinging to life. My actual heart was hammering violently against my ribs, not from physical illness, but from the terrifying adrenaline of a narrow escape. The monitor beeped rhythmically, betraying the frustrating fact that my cardiovascular system was perfectly healthy. The doctor studied the printout, his thick brow furrowing in deep confusion. He removed the stethoscope from his ears and informed me that my heart rhythm was surprisingly stable, suggesting my symptoms were likely the result of a severe panic attack or acute indigestion. I nodded weakly, offering a fabricated story about forgetting my daily blood pressure medication and feeling overwhelmed by intense travel anxiety. Satisfied that I was not in any imminent danger of expiring right on his examination table, the doctor handed me a small plastic cup of lukewarm water and stepped out into the busy hallway to process the necessary release paperwork. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, plunging the small, sterile room into a suffocating silence. I was finally completely alone. I reached into my coat pocket with a trembling hand and pulled out my smartphone. I stared at the glowing screen for a long, torturous moment, the contact named Derek staring blindly back at me. Pressing the green call button felt exactly like stepping off a steep cliff in the pitch dark. The line rang twice before this call finally connected. I expected the cheerful, deeply concerned voice of a loving son waiting patiently to hear that his father was enjoying a relaxing, pre-flight beverage. Instead, the line opened with the disturbing sound of heavy, erratic breathing and the distinct aggressive clatter of a computer keyboard being pounded relentlessly. I forced my voice to sound incredibly raspy and frail, telling him that I had suffered a terrible medical emergency and was currently sitting alone in the airport clinic instead of flying to the Caribbean islands. A normal human being, a normal son, would drop absolutely everything immediately. A normal son would frantically ask which hospital I was being transferred to, or if I needed a specialist doctor, or if I was in severe physical pain. Derek did absolutely none of those things. There was a sickening, hollow silence on the other end of the secure line, followed instantly by a sharp, terrified intake of breath. When he finally spoke, his words were clipped, rushed, and entirely devoid of any human empathy. He demanded to know exactly where my luggage was located. He did not ask a single question about my dangerous chest pains. He did not ask what the emergency paramedics had said about my vital signs. His voice was an octave higher than usual, vibrating with a raw mechanical panic that chilled my blood down to the bone. He specifically interrogated me about the black leather carry-on bag that his wife Monica had so generously given me. Did you take it off the passenger plane with you, or did the flight attendants lock it inside the overhead storage bins? The question was fired at me rapidly, just like a lethal gunshot. The raw desperation in his aggressive tone was definitely not for my personal safety, but for the physical object he had deliberately placed in my trusting hands. The emotional knife twisted deep into my gut, severing decades of unconditional paternal love in a matter of seconds. My analytical auditor instincts, the ones I had tried so desperately to suppress out of blind familial loyalty, roared violently back to life. I analyzed the strange cadence of his voice, the precise calculated choice of his specific words, the complete and total absence of any familial concern. Derek was not worried that his elderly father might die alone in a cold airport clinic. Derek was absolutely terrified that his father had failed to deliver a highly illicit package to a foreign offshore jurisdiction. I swallowed the bitter bile rising in my throat and lied with the cold precision of a seasoned corporate interrogator. I told him the heavy leather bag was sitting safely on the linoleum floor right next to my hospital bed. A massive, shuddering sigh of profound relief erupted loudly from the receiver. It was the distinct sound of a guilty man who had just narrowly avoided a catastrophic execution by his superiors. His tone immediately shifted from panicked interrogation to aggressive, controlling commands. He ordered me not to move a single muscle, explicitly instructing me not to let the airport medical staff, the local police, or any security personnel touch that specific bag under any circumstances whatsoever. He promised a private, armed courier would retrieve the luggage within 30 minutes to drive me to his secure apartment. I agreed, weakly ending the call. The deadly trap was now closing its jaws in New York. I slipped out of the medical clinic the moment the doctor turned his back to consult with a passing nurse. My heart pounded a steady, terrifying rhythm against my ribs as I navigated the bustling concourse, blending into a thick crowd of arriving international passengers. Derek had promised his private courier would arrive in less than 30 minutes, giving me an incredibly narrow window to disappear from the terminal entirely. I spotted a public restroom tucked away near a defunct duty-free shop and ducked inside, hauling the heavy leather carry-on bag with me. The restroom was overwhelmingly sterile, smelling intensely of chemical lemon air freshener and damp paper towels. I bypassed the crowded urinals and rushed straight toward the handicap-accessible stall at the very back, slamming the heavy metal door shut and sliding the deadbolt into place. The sudden privacy offered no comfort, only the suffocating realization that I was currently holding a ticking time bomb. I placed the black leather bag onto the pristine surface of the baby. Changing station, my trembling fingers tracing its reinforced seams. Monica had presented this item to me with a brilliant, affectionate smile, claiming it was crafted from imported Italian calfskin and designed specifically to protect my fragile back during transit. Now, examining it with the critical eye of an auditor, I noticed the structural anomalies immediately. The bag was unnaturally heavy for an empty vessel, and its interior depth did not accurately match the exterior dimensions. I ran my thumb along the bottom edge, feeling a rigid, unyielding panel hidden beneath the luxurious silk lining. There was a false bottom constructed with such meticulous precision that standard airport security scanners would likely register it as a thick protective base layer for transporting expensive electronics. I did not have any sharp tools, so I reached into my pocket and pulled out my metal house key, using the jagged edge to fiercely saw at the silk fabric. The material resisted at first, but sheer, unadulterated panic fueled my movements, and the fabric finally gave way with a loud, satisfying rip. I tore the lining completely back, exposing a dark carbon fiber compartment secured by a biometric thumbprint lock. Fortunately, whoever had designed this enclosure had left it partially unlatched, presumably assuming the bag would remain entirely in my possession until the designated Cayman contact retrieved it. I pried the carbon fiber lid open, revealing a thick layer of anti-static foam. Nestled securely within the gray foam were three heavy metallic rectangular objects. I pulled one out and immediately recognized the matte black casing of a military-grade encrypted hard drive, the exact type used by massive financial institutions to transport highly classified, sensitive corporate data off the grid. Beneath the heavy drives lay a thick manila envelope sealed with a red wax stamp. I ripped the envelope open, my breath catching in my throat as I pulled out a stack of pristine, heavy bond paper. The headers on the documents belonged to a notorious offshore bank located directly in the Cayman Islands, an institution routinely red-flagged by federal regulators for facilitating illicit transactions. I quickly scanned the first page, my eyes darting across columns of dense financial data. The account balances were staggering, showing wire transfers exceeding $50 million originating from untraceable shell companies in Eastern Europe. The money was being rapidly funneled through a complex web of holding corporations before landing securely in this specific offshore account. And sitting right at the very top of the account holder designation, printed in bold, undeniable ink, was my full legal name. I frantically flipped to the signature page of the master contract, hoping against hope that this was some kind of terrible clerical error. Staring back at me was my own distinct flowing signature, executed with such terrifying perfection that I would have sworn under oath I had signed the document myself. The slight hesitation on the loop of the R, the aggressive cross on the H, every tiny idiosyncrasy of my handwriting had been replicated flawlessly. Monica, with her background in corporate law and access to all my retirement paperwork, had spent months studying and copying my signature until she could produce a masterpiece of fraud. They had established a completely verified, legally binding financial identity for me in a foreign jurisdiction, without my knowledge, setting me up as the sole director of a massive illegal enterprise. The sheer brilliance of their sinister plan hit me like a physical blow to the stomach, knocking the remaining wind out of my lungs. I was a retired senior internal auditor, with 40 years of absolutely pristine, unblemished service in the corporate sector. I had a flawless credit history, a completely spotless criminal record, and a professional reputation synonymous with uncompromising ethical integrity. To any federal investigator or international regulatory body reviewing these offshore accounts, I was not an unsuspecting victim. I was the absolute perfect cover. They were deliberately weaponizing my lifelong reputation, painting me as a brilliant rogue auditor who had finally decided to use his insider knowledge of global financial loopholes to orchestrate a massive money laundering empire for a ruthless crime syndicate. I carefully packed the incriminating evidence back into the secret compartment, my hands no longer shaking with blind fear, but vibrating with a profound, icy rage. Derek and Monica had not merely planned to steal my hard-earned retirement savings. They had meticulously engineered my complete destruction, ensuring I would take the fall for their monstrous greed. If I had remained on that airplane landing in that tropical paradise, heavily armed international authorities would have handcuffed me directly on the tarmac, locking me away in a foreign cell for the rest of my natural life. I glanced down at my watch, realizing the private courier would be sweeping the clinic at this exact moment, searching for the very bag sitting on this plastic counter. It was time to disappear into the shadows completely and permanently. I unlocked the heavy metal door of the handicap stall and pushed it open just enough to peer through the narrow gap. The blinding fluorescent lights of the corridor reflected off the polished concourse floor, creating a mirror effect that allowed me to see around the corner without exposing myself. Standing precisely 20 feet away, positioned strategically outside the clinic entrance, were two broad-shouldered men wearing immaculately tailored dark charcoal suits. Their posture was rigid, their hands resting uncomfortably close to the subtle bulges beneath their left lapels. They were not medical couriers sent by a loving son. They were heavily armed professional cartel enforcers, actively interrogating a uniformed airport security guard. The taller man aggressively shoved a smartphone screen into the guard's face, pointing a thick finger at the display. Even from this distance, my aging eyes recognized the bright orange background of the digital boarding pass I had foolishly texted to Derek less than an hour ago. The guard shook his head, pointing his walkie-talkie toward the clinic doors, indicating the targeted patient had not yet been officially discharged. The second enforcer immediately tapped a sleek earpiece, communicating silently with someone else in the terminal. They were coordinating a perimeter search, systematically locking down every exit route from the medical wing. I pulled my head back into the humid restroom, pressing my spine against the tiled wall. A sudden, terrifying realization physically struck me. The men possessed my exact location, not just because of the clinic log, but because I was actively transmitting a beacon. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone, the device Derek upgraded for me last Christmas, under the guise of keeping our family connected. My analytical mind quickly identified the hidden tracking application running quietly in the background. I powered down the device, removed the casing, snapped the internal SIM card in half, and tossed the fractured pieces into the sanitary disposal bin. Destroying the phone was simply not enough to guarantee ultimate safety. I needed a decoy to misdirect their pursuit. I stepped quietly out of the restroom and walked toward a towering pile of abandoned luggage carts near a closed currency exchange booth. An elderly woman was struggling to wrangle her massive, brightly colored suitcases onto a trolley. I offered her a warm, grandfatherly smile, stepped forward to assist her, and smoothly slipped my dead smartphone deep into the side pocket of her floral tote bag. Her flight tags indicated she was heading to Tokyo, ensuring Derek's digital hounds would soon be chasing a phantom signal across the globe. I turned my dark collar up and merged seamlessly into a dense crowd of tourists swarming toward the main terminal hub. The physical toll of the intense adrenaline rush began to weigh heavily on my joints, sending sharp spikes of arthritis radiating through my knees and lower back. I ignored the blinding pain, forcing my legs to maintain a steady, purposeful stride that did not attract unnecessary attention. The black leather bag weighed like a block of solid lead in my sweating hand, containing the lethal evidence required to ultimately save my life. I kept my head angled downward, using the chaotic flow of the crowd as a human shield. A sudden commotion near the central security checkpoint forced the crowd to bottleneck. I glanced up and saw the shorter enforcer standing atop a shoe-shining platform, his hawk-like gaze sweeping across the sea of heads. He was scanning the crowd for a vulnerable elderly man in a beige trench coat. I instantly veered left, ducking into a bustling duty-free electronics store. I moved swiftly to the back display, stripped off my coat, and shoved it behind a towering stack of discounted speakers. I grabbed a generic navy blue hooded sweatshirt from a clearance rack, threw a $50 bill onto the cash register, and pulled the oversized hood deep over my forehead, stepping back out into the concourse. The change in silhouette worked perfectly. The enforcer completely ignored the hooded figure shuffling past a group of boisterous college students. I navigated the labyrinth of duty-free shops and fast food kiosks, keeping my peripheral vision locked on the illuminated signs pointing toward the ground transportation exit. The heavy glass doors were finally visible, showcasing the chaotic rain-slicked pavement of the New York taxi stand. A line of iconic yellow cabs stretched down the curved roadway, engines idling loudly amidst a chorus of aggressive honking horns and shouting dispatchers. I pushed through the revolving glass doors, the cold evening rain instantly soaking through my new sweatshirt. A burly airport dispatcher blew a shrill whistle directing a scarred, dented taxi toward my designated curb. I yanked the rear door open and threw the heavy leather bag across the sticky vinyl seat. Just as I climbed inside, I caught a terrifying glimpse of the tall enforcer sprinting out of the adjacent exit doors, his dark eyes scanning the rainy sidewalk with lethal intensity. He locked eyes with me for a fraction of a second, his hand diving rapidly inside his tailored jacket as he sprinted furiously toward the moving vehicle. I slammed the heavy door shut desperately, shouting at the driver to accelerate away immediately. The taxi lurched forward with a violent squeal of rubber tires merging aggressively into the very thick stream of departing airport traffic. The highly enraged enforcer slapped the trunk of the accelerating car, but the dense line of trailing buses quickly swallowed him whole. The driver glanced at me through the smudged plexiglass divider, raising a thick eyebrow at my frantic behavior. He casually adjusted his chewing gum and asked for my destination. I took a deep, shuddering breath, staring out the rain-streaked window as the airport faded into the dark distance. I gave him the address of a cheap, anonymous motel located deep in the forgotten outskirts of the city, officially leaving my entire old life behind in the rearview mirror. The speeding taxi abruptly abandoned me at the edge of a desolate, rain-swept highway right in front of the Starlight Motor Inn. It was a decaying cinder-block structure, bathed in the erratic flickering glow of a damaged vacancy sign. I paid the driver entirely in small bills, keeping my oversized hood pulled low to obscure my facial features. Before entering the main lodging area, I paused to scan the dark parking lot for any trailing vehicles, then walked briskly toward an attached convenience store that stood completely empty. The apathetic cashier barely glanced up as I purchased a prepaid disposable cell phone and a generic charging cord. I hurried through the freezing rain to room number 11, sliding the brass key into the rusted lock and pushing the heavy wooden door open. The cramped space smelled intensely of stale cigarette smoke, cheap pine disinfectant, and years of neglected maintenance. I immediately locked the heavy metal deadbolt, engaged the rusted security chain, and wedged a sturdy wooden desk chair firmly beneath the door handle for maximum added barricade strength. Tearing open the rigid plastic packaging of the new prepaid device with my teeth, I sat heavily on the edge of the sagging, stained mattress. My hands were remarkably steady now, the initial blind panic entirely replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I reached deep into my damp trouser pocket and extracted a small, crumpled beverage napkin. Sarah, the brave flight attendant, had discreetly pressed this paper into my palm amidst the chaotic medical emergency on the aircraft. Printed on the thin white material in hurried, smudged blue ink was a 10-digit phone number representing my only lifeline. I dialed the numbers deliberately on the new plastic keypad, praying the signal was secure, listening to the hollow ringing echo loudly in the quiet motel room. The call connected on the fourth ring answered with a sharp, breathless whisper. Sarah's voice trembled uncontrollably as she asked if I was safe, confirming she was currently hiding inside a locked airport employee break room. I assured her I had successfully evaded the armed men in the terminal and demanded to know the absolute, unvarnished truth. She took a deep, shuddering breath to steady her rapidly fraying nerves, explaining that she actually recognized my face from a highly exclusive private charter flight she had serviced just 3 days prior. Her primary VIP passengers on that specific charter aircraft had been my only son, Derek, and his wife, Monica. They were flying back to New York from an exclusive high-altitude ski resort in Colorado. Sarah revealed that the couple had consumed several bottles of exceptionally expensive champagne during the turbulent flight. Their significantly lowered inhibitions caused them to speak recklessly loud in the enclosed private cabin. While preparing their gourmet dessert service in the narrow galley, Sarah overheard Monica openly mocking my deeply trusting nature. Monica bragged loudly and proudly about a highly coordinated anonymous tip they had successfully transmitted to the International Criminal Police Organization earlier that very morning. This devastating anonymous tip contained massive amounts of fabricated digital evidence directly linking my personal identity to a global money laundering syndicate. Sarah explained that Derek had officially confirmed to his wife that Interpol agents were already mobilized based on that false intelligence. Those heavily armed international authorities were physically waiting on the baking asphalt of the Grand Cayman airport tarmac. The exact moment the commercial airliner doors opened, armed tactical units were scheduled to board the aircraft and place me under immediate, highly publicized arrest. There would be no local trial, no opportunity to post a cash bail, and absolutely no chance to contact a skilled American attorney before the mandatory jurisdiction transfer process began. The true horrifying depth of their deeply sinister scheme began to fully materialize as Sarah recounted the rest of their drunken, arrogant conversation. Derek had meticulously researched the specific environmental conditions of the offshore penal system. He specifically noted its notoriously abysmal healthcare facilities for elderly, vulnerable inmates. He coldly calculated that a man of my advanced age, supposedly suffering from a severe cardiac condition, would not physically survive more than a few short months in brutal pre-trial detention. Their ultimate goal was never just to humiliate me or frame me for financial crimes. It was a ruthless, calculated strategy to ensure I died quickly and quietly on foreign soil far away from any sympathetic medical professionals. Sarah's voice dropped to a disgusted, hollow whisper as she shared the final sickening detail of their financial plot. Derek had recently drafted a complex legal maneuver regarding my estate planning documents. Normally, if I suddenly died while under an active federal investigation in a foreign country, my entire portfolio of domestic assets would be immediately frozen by the government. However, Derek had inserted a specific obscure contingency clause into the paperwork. This clause allowed him, acting as my primary executor and chief financial officer, to immediately liquidate and transfer all domestic properties to cover potential international legal defense fees. He fully intended to seize my entire lifetime of accumulated savings before the sluggish courts could even process my official death certificate. The flight attendant confessed she had spent the last 3 days paralyzed by fear, unsure how to warn a complete stranger without making herself a target for a ruthless cartel. Seeing my exact printed name on her digital passenger manifest this morning had finally forced her hand. I thanked her with absolute profound sincerity, promising to keep her identity anonymous forever. I firmly instructed her to destroy her phone immediately, break the internal memory card, and throw the plastic pieces into separate public trash bins. The secure cellular line went completely dead, leaving me sitting in the dim light of the motel room, facing a chilling new reality. My only son was not merely a greedy corporate thief. He was a highly calculated, cold-blooded sociopath who had enthusiastically engineered his own father's murder for a larger bank balance. I carefully maneuvered the heavy desk chair away from the motel room door, leaving the rusted security chain engaged just in case. The rain outside had intensified into a torrential downpour, rhythmically beating against the thin glass window and masking the sporadic sounds of the nearby highway. I slipped the newly purchased burner phone into my damp pocket and approached the motel's front office, a tiny, poorly lit cubicle attached to the main building. The apathetic clerk from earlier had been replaced by a middle-aged manager slumped behind a chaotic desk, entirely engrossed in a late-night television program. I gently tapped the scratched plexiglass divider, offering him a crisp $50 bill and politely requesting a brief 30-minute session on his personal laptop to check an urgent family email. The manager wordlessly accepted the cash, sliding the bulky, outdated machine across the counter and returning his attention to the glowing television screen. I carried the laptop to a small, wobbly table tucked into the corner of the office, shielding the screen from the manager's direct line of sight. My fingers danced rapidly across the worn keyboard, instinctively navigating toward the secure portal of my primary financial institution. This specific banking portal housed the entirety of my domestic wealth, consolidating 40 years of disciplined saving, my comprehensive 401k, and the deed to my fully paid-off suburban home in Chicago. I carefully typed in my complex alphanumeric password, my heart rate accelerating as the spinning, loading icon mocked my growing anxiety. The screen finally refreshed, displaying my comprehensive account dashboard, in stark, undeniable black and white text. The total combined balance sitting at the very top of the page where a comfortable seven-figure sum usually resided was currently displaying a bold, terrifying zero. I blinked rapidly, convinced my aging eyes were misinterpreting a temporary system glitch or a temporary server error. I violently clicked the mouse, refreshing the secure page 3 times in rapid succession, but the devastating numerical value remained absolutely unchanged. A cold, paralyzing numbness began to spread outward from my chest, creeping down my arms and settling heavily into my fingertips. I clicked on the detailed transaction history tab, demanding an immediate explanation for the sudden, catastrophic evaporation of my entire life's work. The digital ledger revealed a meticulously executed series of massive wire transfers, all authorized during the exact 3-day window when Derek and Monica were supposedly enjoying their luxurious ski vacation in Colorado. The transaction logs confirmed that my entire 401k portfolio had been aggressively liquidated, incurring massive early withdrawal penalties that I would now be personally liable for. Every single penny of that liquidated cash had been instantaneously routed into the exact same Eastern European shell companies listed in the offshore banking documents, currently hidden in my carry-on bag. Derek had not simply forged my signature to create a new illegal identity. He had systematically weaponized the comprehensive power of attorney I had granted him after Patricia's sudden death, using that profound legal trust to utterly obliterate my domestic financial existence. He had drained my accounts to provide the necessary untraceable seed money required to initiate the cartel's massive money laundering operation. My breathing grew shallow and erratic as I clicked over to the real estate section of the portal, praying that my beloved family home had somehow survived this unprecedented financial massacre. The screen loaded, revealing a newly generated, aggressively structured, reversed mortgage document attached directly to my property deed. Derek had successfully leveraged the entire equity of the house Patricia and I had spent 30 years lovingly restoring, extracting maximum cash value from the property just 48 hours ago. The chilling reality of my current situation slammed into me with the force of a speeding freight train. I was no longer a comfortably retired, respected corporate auditor. I was currently a homeless, penniless international fugitive, completely stripped of every single resource I had ever earned. A sudden jarring notification popped up in the bottom right corner of the laptop screen, momentarily breaking my paralyzed focus. It was an automated security alert from the bank warning me that a massive, unexpected international wire transfer had just been successfully initiated from my account. I stared at the alert in utter confusion, knowing my domestic accounts were already completely drained. I quickly clicked the notification, tracing the origin of the sudden transfer. The money was not moving out of my empty domestic accounts. It was moving out of the newly established illicit offshore account in the Cayman Islands, the one currently holding $50 million of cartel money. The digital transfer authorization listed the destination as a highly obscure, untraceable cryptocurrency exchange based in the United Arab Emirates. I analyzed the specific routing numbers, my seasoned auditor brain immediately recognizing the distinct digital fingerprint of the transaction. This aggressive transfer was not initiated by the Eastern European cartel, nor was it authorized by Derek's typical banking protocols. The authorization codes matched a specific set of complex, legal bypass maneuvers that Monica had casually bragged about, learning during her corporate law seminars. My daughter-in-law was not merely a passive accomplice in Derek's monstrous scheme. She was currently executing a massive independent financial heist, actively stealing millions directly from the ruthless cartel, while Derek remained completely oblivious. The sheer audacity of her independent theft was staggering, adding an entirely new, incredibly dangerous layer of volatility to an already lethal situation. If the cartel discovered their laundered funds were suddenly disappearing into untraceable crypto wallets, they would not patiently wait for international authorities to arrest me in the Cayman Islands. They would immediately dispatch heavily armed extraction teams to hunt down the supposed mastermind, actively seeking violent, immediate retribution for the stolen money. I hastily logged out of the secure banking portal, meticulously clearing the laptop's entire browser history to erase any digital footprint of my activity. I returned the computer to the apathetic manager, my mind racing furiously as I sprinted back through the freezing rain toward room 11. I was no longer just running from Interpol or my treacherous son. I was now actively caught in the crossfire of a massive impending cartel war. The glowing screen of the motel manager's laptop had faded to black, but the devastating zeros of my drained accounts remained burned into my retinas. I stumbled back to room 11 through the relentless freezing downpour, completely numb to the icy water soaking through my cheap, oversized sweatshirt. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside the stifling, cigarette-stained confines of my temporary prison. I sank onto the edge of the sagging mattress, burying my face in my trembling, calloused hands. The sheer, incomprehensible magnitude of the betrayal threatened to crush my sanity entirely. My mind ruthlessly replayed a montage of fractured memories, mocking the absolute illusion of my perfect family. I remembered Derek as a bright-eyed, energetic 7-year-old boy running across the manicured lawn of the very house he had just stolen from me. I had spent countless weekends teaching him how to ride his first bicycle, holding the back of the seat, running alongside him, until my lungs burned. I remembered the exact moment I let go, the mixture of terror and overwhelming pride as he pedaled away on his own, his laughter echoing in the warm summer air. I had spent my entire life working grueling 80-hour weeks at the auditing firm, sacrificing my own peace of mind to ensure that boy would never know the bitter taste of poverty or desperation. And then there was Patricia. Sweet, endlessly patient Patricia. The memory of my late wife struck me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the remaining oxygen from the cramped motel room. She had adored Derek with unconditional, maternal blindness. When Derek graduated from his prestigious business school, Patricia had cried tears of absolute joy, clutching my arm and whispering that all our quiet sacrifices had finally paid off. She believed we had raised a man of honor, a leader, a son who would carry our family legacy forward with dignity. Thank God she was not alive to witness this nightmare. Thank God the sudden aneurysm had spared her from the soul-destroying reality that the son she cherished had morphed into a cold-blooded, calculating sociopath. A bitter, jagged sob tore from my throat, echoing loudly against the peeling wallpaper. The physical toll of the last few hours was rapidly catching up with my 70-year-old body. My joints ached with a dull, throbbing intensity, and my chest felt tight with unresolved panic. I was a senior citizen, a widower, a man who should have been spending his twilight years cultivating a garden or reading classic literature on a sunlit porch. Instead, I was a hunted international fugitive, hiding in a filthy roadside motel, actively running from heavily armed cartel enforcers and the looming specter of a foreign prison cell. I laid back on the stained bedspread, staring blankly at the water-damaged ceiling. The despair was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It would be so incredibly easy to simply give up. I could walk out of this motel room, find the nearest police precinct, and surrender. I could try to explain the complex framing operation to a skeptical federal agent. But my seasoned auditor instincts knew exactly how that scenario would play out. Derek had spent months meticulously constructing an airtight digital cage around my identity. Without concrete, irrefutable counter-evidence, the authorities would view my frantic story as the pathetic, desperate lies of a guilty old man facing the consequences of his own illicit greed. Derek would walk away clean, and I would die behind bars, forever branded a criminal mastermind. The profound injustice of that potential reality sparked a tiny glowing ember deep within the freezing void of my chest. The agonizing sorrow slowly began to recede, systematically replaced by a cold, unfamiliar, and deeply terrifying anger. I sat back up, wiping the tears from my weathered face. I was Richard Harrison. I had not spent 40 years navigating the treacherous, shark-infested waters of corporate finance, just to be outmaneuvered by an arrogant, greedy child who thought he was invincible. I had built a legendary career dissecting the elaborate lies of desperate, highly intelligent white-collar criminals. I knew exactly how to track hidden assets, how to identify microscopic inconsistencies in offshore ledgers, and how to entirely dismantle a fraudulent financial structure from the inside out. I closed my eyes and forcefully compartmentalized the emotional agony of the betrayed father, locking it away in a dark corner of my mind. I summoned the relentless, analytical predator that I used to be. The transition was agonizing, like snapping a dislocated bone back into place, but it was absolutely necessary for survival. I mentally reviewed the terrifying data I had just witnessed on the banking portal. The specific routing numbers, the aggressive liquidation penalties, the untraceable cryptocurrency transfers initiated by Monica. There were patterns hidden within that chaos. Derek and Monica were arrogant, and arrogant criminals always left digital breadcrumbs. I paced the narrow length of the motel room, my mind shifting into a higher, more dangerous gear. Every detail of the last few hours was subjected to intense, rigorous scrutiny. Why had Monica chosen that specific United Arab Emirates exchange for her secret crypto siphon? It was notorious for poor regulatory compliance, yes, but it also suffered from severe latency issues during high-volume trading hours. That was a tactical vulnerability. And Derek's reverse mortgage on my property. The paperwork had been rushed, processed through a predatory lending firm, known for cutting corners on secondary verification protocols. That was another glaring weakness, a frayed thread in his supposedly flawless tapestry of fraud. They had underestimated me profoundly. They had looked at my gray hair, my quiet demeanor, and my deep grief over Patricia's death, and they had seen only a pathetic, vulnerable target. They had completely forgotten the ruthless corporate auditor who used to strike fear into the hearts of corrupt boardrooms across the nation. They thought they had buried me alive, but they had simply given me the perfect cover of darkness to orchestrate my return. I grabbed the prepaid burner phone from the chipped nightstand, my thumb hovering over the plastic keypad. The storm outside raged on, but the storm brewing inside me was infinitely more destructive. I was ready to declare war. I packed the motel manager's laptop into my wet duffel bag, leaving the remaining cash from my withdrawal on his cluttered desk. The rain outside had slackened to a steady drizzle, casting long, wavering reflections across the cracked asphalt. I pulled my hood low and stepped out into the night, the damp air biting through the thin fabric of my sweatshirt. I had one remaining lifeline. Reaching into the inner pocket of my coat, I pulled out a small waterproof notebook I always kept on me. I flipped past pages of old auditing notes and grocery lists until I found the contact information for Mitchell Reed. Mitchell and I went back decades. He was a retired special agent for the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. We had collaborated on several high-profile corporate fraud cases during my auditing career. I knew he was discreet, resourceful, and above all, deeply loyal. Using the burner phone, I dialed his secure number. The line clicked open, and a gravelly voice answered. I identified myself quickly, my voice low and urgent. Mitchell did not ask unnecessary questions. I gave me a location and a time. An hour later, I was walking down a concrete ramp into a subterranean parking garage beneath a massive commercial complex in downtown Chicago. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and damp concrete. A solitary flickering fluorescent light illuminated a dark blue sedan parked in the far corner. Mitchell stood leaning against the driver's side door, his hands deep in the pockets of a long black trench coat. He was a tall, imposing man with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that had seen the darkest corners of corporate greed. He opened the passenger door without a word, gesturing for me to get inside. I slid into the leather, the warmth of the heater. A welcome relief. Mitchell got into the driver's seat, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror. He asked me to show him what I had found. I pulled the manila envelope from my bag, the red wax seal now broken, and handed it to him. He switched on a small overhead reading light, his eyes scanning the documents with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned investigator. Mitchell's expression darkened as he flipped through the pages. The silence in the car stretched out, heavy and oppressive. When he finally looked up, his jaw was clenched tight. He identified the specific routing codes on the offshore accounts. The network belonged to the Volkov Syndicate, a notoriously ruthless Eastern European organized crime group. They were known for aggressive money laundering operations, specializing in complex corporate structures that insulated the primary leaders from any legal accountability. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The Volkov Syndicate did not negotiate. They did not leave loose ends. If they discovered their funds were missing, they would unleash a level of violence that I could scarcely comprehend. Mitchell confirmed my fears. He explained that Derek had likely been recruited as a high-level smurf, a sophisticated operative tasked with placing illicit funds into the legitimate financial system. The sheer volume of the transfers indicated Derek was operating at a dangerous level far above his actual capabilities. Mitchell pointed out a crucial detail I had missed. The offshore accounts were not simply holding accounts. They were actively structured to function as collateral for a massive impending international arms deal. The Volkov Syndicate was relying on those specific funds to secure weaponry on the black market. The sudden disappearance of the money, courtesy of Monica's unauthorized crypto transfers, would instantly trigger a lethal response. The syndicate would assume I, the named director, had stolen the funds. The situation was far more volatile than I had anticipated. I was no longer merely a scapegoat for money laundering. I was the primary target for a highly organized, heavily armed criminal organization. The stakes had escalated from prison time to immediate violent execution. Mitchell's tone hardened. He told me that my grief, my paternal confusion had to end right now. I could no longer afford the luxury of being a disappointed father. I had to become the cold-blooded, analytical auditor I used to be. My survival depended entirely on my ability to dissect their financial structure, anticipate their movements, and exploit their vulnerabilities. Mitchell outlined a dangerous high-stakes strategy. We needed to map the entire network, identify the key players within the syndicate, and find the digital breadcrumbs Monica had left behind during her heist. If we could locate the stolen funds before the Volkovs did, we might have leverage. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only option available. I took a deep breath, the cold reality of my situation settling firmly in my chest. The Richard Harrison, who believed in family loyalty, was gone, buried beneath the weight of absolute betrayal. The man sitting in the passenger seat of Mitchell's car was a seasoned investigator, preparing to dismantle the most complex, dangerous financial web he had ever encountered. The transition was complete. I nodded slowly, my voice devoid of emotion as I told Mitchell to show me everything he knew about the Volkov Syndicate. The hunt had officially begun. Mitchell drove us to a dilapidated warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. He unlocked a heavy steel door, revealing a makeshift command center filled with humming server racks and cooling fans. Waiting inside was a young woman with neon-pink hair and a severe expression. Mitchell introduced her simply as Cypher. She did not offer her hand or exchange pleasantries. She immediately demanded the black carbon fiber case. I handed it over, watching as she placed it carefully onto a stainless steel workbench. She extracted the encrypted hard drives using sterile gloves and connected them to an isolated standalone terminal. The screen blinked alive with lines of aggressive red code. Cypher typed furiously, her eyes scanning the scrolling text. She announced that the cartel had utilized a dynamic polymorphic encryption protocol. Every time an unauthorized access attempt occurred, the digital locks shifted their fundamental structure. It was designed to actively hunt intruders and permanently corrupt the core data upon detection. She connected a secondary device, a custom-built hardware bypass tool, attempting to freeze the shifting algorithms. The monitors flared with warning notifications. A countdown timer suddenly appeared in the upper right corner of the primary screen. We had exactly 3 minutes before the drive initiated a localized thermal surge to melt its own internal components. The air in the cold warehouse grew thick with suffocating tension. Mitchell paced behind us, his jaw clenched tightly. Cypher launched a brute force attack program, throwing thousands of cryptographic keys at the firewall per second. The timer ticked down to 2 minutes. The red warning text began to flash more rapidly, signaling an impending hardware failure. I stared at the data streams, my mind shifting into the familiar rhythm of corporate auditing. I noticed a recurring numerical sequence embedded deep within the rejection logs. I recognized that specific pattern from my years of analyzing international wire transfer protocols. I stepped closer to the screen, pointing a trembling finger at the repeating numerical string. I told her that the sequence was a standard routing identifier used by specific offshore banking software to bypass daily transaction limits. The cartel had heavily modified commercial banking code to build their digital fortress. I suggested she stop attempting a frontal cryptographic assault and instead feed the system a simulated corporate approval signature. If the drive believed it was receiving a legitimate internal audit request from a high-level executive, it might temporarily lower its defensive shields. Cypher paused her typing for a split second, weighing the logic of my unorthodox strategy. With less than 90 seconds remaining on the fatal countdown, she nodded curtly. She quickly generated a synthetic audit token utilizing the exact formatting standards I described to her. She injected the simulated token directly into the primary data stream. The red warning screens flickered violently, struggling to process the conflicting commands. The countdown timer froze at exactly 42 seconds. The heavy hum of the cooling fans seemed to amplify in the deafening silence of the warehouse. Suddenly, the aggressive red text vanished entirely, replaced by a very calm, pale blue interface. The primary security firewall had finally collapsed. A massive directory of encrypted folders materialized on the main monitor. Cypher let out a long, shaky breath, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the first master file. Raw, unfiltered financial data began to cascade across the multiple screens. It was an overwhelming flood of offshore accounts, dummy corporations, encrypted cryptocurrency wallets, and international wire transfer receipts. Mitchell leaned over my shoulder, his experienced eyes darting across the overwhelming volume of illicit transactions. I directed Cypher to filter the master ledger, specifically by outgoing funds linked to my forged identity. She executed the command, compiling the scattered data points into a single comprehensive spreadsheet. The software took several long moments to calculate the sheer magnitude of the financial movements. When the final sum generated at the bottom of the column, my breath caught painfully in my throat. The total amount of laundered money was not the initial $50 million I had assumed. The final figure stood at an astonishing $112 million. My son had been operating as a top-tier launderer for much longer than any of us had suspected. The scale of his betrayal was monumental, extending far beyond a few isolated transactions. I ordered Cypher to dig deeper into the specific authorization logs, searching for the exact mechanism Derek used to insulate himself from the daily operations. She isolated a hidden directory labeled with my initials. Inside, we found a terrifying collection of digital artifacts. Derek had systematically routed every single illegal transaction through a virtual private network established under my home internet protocol address. He had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that any forensic investigation would point directly to my suburban living room. We uncovered fabricated email correspondence between my personal email account and known syndicate associates. The emails were chillingly authentic, mimicking my formal writing style perfectly down to my preferred punctuation choices. He had created a comprehensive digital shadow of me, a phantom criminal mastermind operating quietly from the comfort of my retirement home. Every single piece of evidence was meticulously designed to ensure I would take the full impact of any federal prosecution, leaving him completely untouched and incredibly wealthy. Just as the horrifying reality of my absolute framing settled heavily over me, Cypher let out a sharp, frightened gasp. She pointed a shaking finger to a newly discovered subroutine buried deep beneath the massive email archives. The cartel had secretly installed a digital dead man switch within the complex system architecture. This specific malicious code was programmed to automatically transmit all the fabricated evidence directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. If the primary cartel accounts ever dropped below a certain financial threshold, Derek had unknowingly placed a loaded gun to my head, and the deadly trigger was tied inextricably to the volatile syndicate bank balances we were actively trying to dismantle. I stared intently at the blinking cursor over the dead man's switch. The architecture of the malicious code lacked Derek's impatient digital signature. My son possessed a brilliant financial mind, but he lacked the programming expertise required to weave an automated federal trigger into a complex firewall. The terrifying truth solidified in my mind. Monica had personally engineered this lethal failsafe. She deliberately positioned Derek as the visible architect of the laundering scheme, ensuring the Volkov syndicate would focus their inevitable wrath entirely on her naive husband while she quietly drained their massive offshore reservoirs into untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. Mitchell leaned closer to the glowing monitor, tapping a digital timestamp embedded within Monica's extraction algorithm. The automated crypto siphoning was scheduled to reach maximum operational velocity at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow evening. Cipher rapidly cross-referenced that precise timeline against international flight manifests, departing out of major metropolitan airports. She located a luxurious first-class, one-way ticket to Dubai booked securely under a highly sophisticated corporate alias. Monica was mathematically timing the complete financial collapse of the cartel's offshore accounts to coincide perfectly with her aircraft, leaving the tarmac, handing her oblivious husband over to a ruthless death squad. A highly vivid, gruesome visualization of my son's impending physical fate flooded my conscious mind. The brutal Volkov enforcers would not simply execute him with a quick bullet to the head. They would systematically torture his body for the missing $112 million, aggressively demanding financial answers he genuinely did not possess. Derek was currently sitting in his Manhattan penthouse, sipping expensive bourbon, completely oblivious to the terrifying fact that his arrogant illusions of criminal mastery were about to result in his violent dismemberment. He was a heavily manipulated pawn marching cheerfully toward an inescapable slaughterhouse. A crushing moral crisis threatened to paralyze my breathing. If I remained safely hidden within these dark industrial shadows, the automated dead man's switch would eventually activate without interference. The federal authorities would hunt me down based entirely on fabricated evidence, and the unforgiving cartel would systematically annihilate my only son. Conversely, if I anonymously warned Derek about his deceptive wife's impending betrayal, his notoriously fragile ego and inherent emotional cowardice would instantly trigger a blind panic. He would alert the dangerous syndicate directly in a desperate attempt to bargain for his own life, invariably accelerating both our horrific executions. I violently rejected the weak concept of passive salvation. Actually saving Derek's physical life required the absolute destruction of his entire current reality. I could not merely rescue the arrogant corporate executive. I had to completely break his psyche down to its most basic vulnerable core components. He needed to be violently stripped of his stolen wealth, his false marriage, and his toxic criminal hubris. I consciously chose the dark path of maximum highly calculated retribution. I would methodically dismantle his privileged existence with my own bare hands, forcing him to experience the exact terrifying helplessness he had willingly orchestrated. Cipher abruptly interrupted my dark, vengeful resolve, highlighting a critical structural vulnerability buried deep within Monica's complex dead man's switch. The automated federal data dump strictly required a continuous, uninterrupted digital handshake with a localized private server physically housed directly inside Derek's lavish corporate corner office. If we could strategically sever that specific hardware connection without triggering a massive security alarm, we could successfully delay the fatal evidence transmission indefinitely. This heavily guarded localized server functioned as the vital central nervous system for the entire framing operation, holding the master encryption keys desperately needed to permanently lock Monica out. Mitchell quickly pulled out his encrypted satellite phone and contacted a reliable deep cover asset buried securely within the Volkov organization's middle management tier. The incredibly brief, cryptic conversation immediately confirmed our absolute worst fears regarding the rapidly shrinking timeline. The syndicate's brutal internal auditors had somehow already detected minor liquidity fluctuations caused by Monica's greedy initial test transfers. A heavily armed, highly dangerous cleanup crew was actively mobilizing inside a Brooklyn warehouse, preparing to violently storm Derek's financial firm to conduct a hostile in-person audit of the primary offshore ledgers. We had drastically less operational time than expected. I sternly instructed Cypher to immediately begin digitally constructing a perfectly mirrored network environment, essentially designing a flawless virtual replica of the compromised Cayman Island banking accounts. My newfound tactical strategy was ruthlessly and beautifully elegant. We would seamlessly transition Monica's greedy extraction algorithm directly into the fake digital environment, falsely allowing her to believe she was successfully stealing the cartel's vast millions. Simultaneously, we would aggressively and secretly reroute the actual syndicate funds directly into a massive, totally impenetrable ghost account that only my biometric data controlled. We would effectively steal the massive fortune directly from the violent thieves. Perfectly executing this complex double heist required direct, immediate physical sabotage of Derek's heavily guarded office server to successfully install the necessary routing bypass. I rapidly outlined a remarkably bold, high-risk tactical physical intrusion. I would orchestrate a targeted, localized digital electrical blackout across Derek's entire corporate office floor, intentionally triggering a mandatory building evacuation protocol, while the blaring fire alarms forcefully pushed my confused son and his panicked staff out onto the chaotic Manhattan streets. Mitchell's specialized extraction team would covertly infiltrate the completely evacuated executive suite. They would physically slice deep into the server's primary fiber cables. I stood up from the stainless steel workbench, shedding the last remnants of my paternal softness. The grieving, bewildered elderly father, who had boarded that commercial airplane hours ago, was now officially dead, replaced by an apex predator forged from 4 decades of high-stakes corporate auditing. I looked directly at Mitchell and authorized the immediate commencement of the localized digital blackout. I was no longer merely surviving a horrific familial betrayal. I was actively initiating a catastrophic financial war. My treacherous son had built a fragile house of cards on my open grave, and I was striking the match. The heavy steel door of the covert warehouse vibrated violently as Mitchell's encrypted satellite phone chirped twice in rapid succession. His specialized extraction team had successfully breached the massive Manhattan high-rise. A localized electromagnetic pulse triggered the corporate building's emergency evacuation protocols, flooding the luxurious executive suites with blinding strobe lights and deafening sirens. Derek and his panicked staff were currently rushing frantically down 30 flights of concrete stairs, leaving the highly restricted corporate server room completely abandoned. The tactical team sliced precisely through the primary fiber optic trunks, using heavy ceramic shears. The physical tether connecting Monica's malicious dead man's switch to the outside world was instantly and permanently severed. Cypher immediately launched the experimental Phantom Bridge from our isolated computer terminal. The primary screen fragmented into a dizzying kaleidoscope of vibrant green and black code, as her mirrored virtual environment seamlessly caught the falling digital network connections. We successfully intercepted the cartel's offshore banking feeds a fraction of a millisecond before their automated security protocols could register the catastrophic physical hardware failure occurring in New York. We were now operating entirely inside a highly volatile, completely invisible sandbox, separated from global financial regulators. I pulled my chair directly in front of the secondary monitor to rapidly construct the Phantom Ghost account. This could not be a standard offshore shell corporation, vulnerable to standard tracking algorithms. I built a dynamic, decentralized financial vault utilizing a continuously rotating blockchain protocol specifically designed to resist brute force decryption. I hard-coded my own biometric signatures deep into the foundational layers of the system architecture. Accessing this specific digital ledger required a live retinal scan and a real-time heart rate rhythm matching my specific physiological parameters. The newly created vault was an absolute digital fortress that could not be hacked, coerced, or forcefully transferred without my active participation. Cypher quickly isolated Monica's greedy extraction algorithm, freezing its dangerous countdown sequence just a few hours before its scheduled execution. Instead of permanently deleting her malicious code, we surgically altered the outbound destination parameters to suit our immediate needs. We skillfully replaced her untraceable cryptocurrency wallet keys with the exact routing addresses of my newly minted biometric vault. We were ruthlessly weaponizing my daughter-in-law's brilliant thievery directly against her, utilizing her own carefully hidden pipelines to quietly siphon the massive cartel funds. I firmly initiated the very first transfer sequence, actively authorizing the immediate movement of $10 million. The green progress bar crept forward at an agonizingly slow pace across the dark monitor. Complex international wire protocols consistently require multiple verified handshakes across various sovereign banking servers to clear. Suddenly, a bright yellow warning light flashed aggressively on Cypher's primary monitor. The Volkov Syndicate's automated watchdog bots had awakened much earlier than we anticipated. The artificial intelligence algorithms instantly recognized the massive liquidity drain and began tracing the unauthorized flow. Mitchell did not hesitate for a single second. He swiftly deployed a massive pre-configured distributed denial of service attack directly against the cartel's primary accounting servers located in St. Petersburg. Millions of hijacked internet protocol addresses simultaneously flooded the dangerous syndicate's internal auditing network with absolute garbage data requests. The brutal digital assault effectively blinded their watchdog bots, plunging the cartel's paranoid financial overseers into complete and absolute digital darkness while we continued to steadily drain their offshore accounts. The steady digital transfer successfully crossed the $25 million threshold. My biometric vault immediately began its automated self-sealing security process. For every $5 million that successfully cleared the final complex routing hurdle, a brand new layer of heavy quantum encryption locked securely into place directly behind the resting funds. The stolen money was slowly being encased in impenetrable digital concrete. However, the system suddenly halted completely. A stark red prompt demanding a manual two-factor authentication override flashed brightly across the very center of my screen. Derek had quietly updated his executive banking security settings without notifying anyone. The foreign bank was aggressively demanding a 6-digit code that had just been transmitted via short message service directly to his personal smartphone. He was currently standing outside on a chaotic Manhattan sidewalk, completely surrounded by blaring city fire engines and confused employees. If he looked down at his glowing screen and saw a massive offshore transfer authorization, he would immediately freeze all the accounts. Our entire operation hung precariously on his ringing mobile device. Cypher's fingers blurred furiously across her mechanical keyboard as she expertly initiated a highly illegal signaling system, 7 network spoof. She actively hijacked the specific cellular tower nearest to the evacuated corporate building, tricking the global telecommunications network into falsely believing our warehouse terminal was actually Derek's mobile phone. The red prompt on my screen vanished instantly, immediately replaced by a bright green text box containing the freshly intercepted 6-digit code. Derek remained completely ignorant on the freezing rain-slicked sidewalk. I typed the stolen numerical code into the blinking authorization field and slammed the enter key with absolute authority. The remaining $25 million surged violently through the open digital pipeline in one massive, completely unstoppable wave. The green progress bar hit 100%. Exactly $50 million of ruthless cartel blood money now rested securely within my impenetrable biometric vault. The Volkov Syndicate's primary operational account was drastically and permanently crippled. I immediately initiated the severe scorched earth protocol to To permanently cover our precarious tracks, Cypher deployed a highly aggressive data-wiping computer worm that raced backward through the collapsing Phantom Bridge. The destructive worm systematically devoured every single routing slip, every false internet protocol address, and every digital handshake we had just generated. It burned the invisible digital bridge to pure ash, leaving absolutely no traceable forensic evidence linking the massive financial theft to our isolated warehouse terminal. The ghost account was fully solidified. I now possessed absolute leverage over all my enemies. My transformation from a grieving father into a ruthless corporate predator was finally complete. I tapped my fingers rhythmically against the cool stainless steel of the workbench, watching Cypher finalize the ghost hack. With the $50 million securely encased within my biometric vault, the next crucial step was surveillance. I needed eyes inside Derek's world to gauge the cartel's immediate response. I instructed Cypher to breach the internal security feeds of Derek's financial firm. She bypassed the building's rudimentary firewalls with alarming ease, rapidly pulling up a grid of high-definition security camera feeds on the secondary monitor. The chaotic scene unfolding in the lobby was exactly what I anticipated. The false fire alarm had effectively cleared the building, and confused employees were just beginning to trickle back through the revolving doors. I zeroed in on this camera positioned outside Derek's corner office. A few moments later, my son appeared on screen, his tailored suit rumpled from the sudden evacuation. He ran a frantic hand through his hair, aggressively pushing past his bewildered assistant to access his private sanctuary. I watched intently as he collapsed into his ergonomic leather chair, his face pale and drawn. He immediately reached for his sleek desk phone, presumably to contact Monica or attempt to access the offshore accounts. Before his fingers could even graze the keypad, the heavy mahogany door of his office was thrust open with terrifying force. 3 men entered the room, moving with a cold, predatory synchronicity that instantly identified them as professional enforcers. They did not wear the standard corporate attire common in that building. Their dark, tailored suits were cut specifically to conceal bulky shoulder holsters. The tallest of the 3 men, a giant with a jagged scar bisecting his left eyebrow, calmly closed and locked the office door behind him. He stepped forward, placing a thick, calloused hand flat on Derek's pristine desk. The sudden, suffocating silence in the room was palpable even through the muted security feed. Derek shrank back into his chair, his previous arrogance entirely evaporating under the crushing weight of their menacing presence. The scarred man leaned in closely, his voice likely a low, deadly rumble that the camera's microphone struggled to pick up. He forcefully tapped a sleek black smartphone onto the polished wood surface, displaying a screen that I knew contained the terrifying reality of the emptied offshore accounts. Derek leaned forward to inspect the screen, and I watched his entire body violently flinch. The blood visibly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified, trapped animal. He began shaking his head frantically, his hands raised in a desperate defensive gesture. I could practically hear his frantic, stammered denials, his pathetic attempts to shift the blame away from himself. The scarred man did not react to Derek's panic. He simply reached into his inner jacket pocket, moving with agonizing slowness. He extracted a small, heavy silver object and placed it deliberately next to the smartphone. It was a single, pristine bullet. The message was universally understood and undeniably lethal. The enforcer leaned closer still, his face inches from Derek's. He slowly raised a single finger, then another, clearly outlining a rigid, non-negotiable timeline. Derek was given exactly 48 hours to magically reproduce the missing $50 million. The enforcer pointed aggressively toward the floor, then made a swift horizontal slashing motion across his own throat, making the fatal consequence of failure brutally clear. The 3 men turned in perfect unison and exited the office, leaving Derek completely alone in his shattered corporate sanctuary. He stared blankly at the single silver bullet resting on his desk, his chest heaving with erratic, panicked breaths. He grabbed his desk phone. His fingers trembling so violently, he struggled to dial the number. He was likely calling Monica, desperately seeking answers for a catastrophe he fundamentally could not comprehend. I leaned back in my chair, the cold, calculating auditor fully in control. The syndicate had delivered their ultimatum, effectively placing a definitive expiration date on my son's life. The pressure was mounting rapidly, and the fragile alliance between Derek and Monica was about to face an existential stress test. The 48-hour countdown had officially begun, and I held the only key to their survival. Mitchell approached from behind, his gaze fixed on the monitor, displaying Derek's breakdown. He noted the syndicate's aggressive timeline, acknowledging that their rapid response indicated a severe internal crisis. The stolen funds were clearly earmarked for a critical time-sensitive operation, and the cartel's leadership was unwilling to accept any delays. The sheer violence of their threat meant they would be actively monitoring Derek's every move, significantly complicating our next tactical maneuver. I instructed Cypher to maintain a continuous encrypted recording of the office feeds, ensuring we captured any further interactions between Derek and the cartel operatives. We needed to map the syndicate's local network, identifying the specific enforcers tasked with monitoring my son. Mitchell immediately began coordinating with his deep cover asset, attempting to intercept any internal chatter regarding the missing funds. The intelligence we gathered over the next 48 hours would be vital for navigating the treacherous endgame. The warehouse hummed with renewed intensity as we prepared for the next phase of the operation. The initial shock of betrayal had been entirely replaced by a singular, focused objective. I was no longer reacting to Derek's chaotic schemes. I was actively manipulating the board, forcing him to react to my strategic deployments. The anonymous blackmail video was the next crucial piece of leverage designed to systematically dismantle his remaining psychological defenses. The clock was ticking mercilessly, and I intended to utilize every single remaining second to ensure maximum calculated retribution. I stood in the center of the cold warehouse, my eyes locked on the dual monitors displaying the aftermath of the cartel's violent ultimatum. Derek had completely collapsed into a state of catatonic shock, staring blankly at the single silver bullet resting on his polished mahogany desk. The heavy silence in his office was abruptly broken by the shrill ringing of his desk phone. He answered it with a trembling hand, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whisper. I watched his face contort in pure agony as he desperately tried to explain the sudden catastrophic disappearance of $50 million to an unseen interrogator. The conversation was brief and clearly terrifying ending, with Derek violently slamming the phone down and burying his face in his hands. The stage was perfectly set for my psychological assault. I needed to shatter his remaining illusions of control and isolate him entirely from Monica's toxic influence. I instructed Cypher to prepare the digital transmission payload. Using the high-definition camera embedded in her terminal, I recorded a short, highly calculated video message. The footage was stark and undeniable, clearly showing the sliced open black leather carry-on bag, the exposed carbon fiber compartment, and the 3 encrypted military-grade hard drives resting ominously on the stainless steel workbench. I used a specialized audio scrambling software to completely distort my voice, lowering the pitch to a menacing, digitized growl that masked any recognizable paternal warmth. I did not want Derek to immediately realize his supposedly deceased father was orchestrating his downfall. I wanted him to believe he was dealing with a ruthless, unknown cyber mercenary who had successfully hijacked the entire cartel operation. I kept the message incredibly brief, delivering the uncompromising demands with absolute chilling precision. The distorted voice echoed through the warehouse as Cypher processed the audio file. I possess the drives. I control the ghost accounts. You have exactly 24 hours to deliver the original notarized deed to the Harrison family property, alongside $2 million in unmarked, non-sequential cash. Bring the items to the rusted service elevator at the abandoned Pier 4 shipping terminal at precisely midnight. If you contact the authorities, or if you fail to arrive alone, the decrypted financial ledgers will be simultaneously transmitted to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Volkov Syndicate leadership. Your execution will become an international spectacle. Cypher embedded the menacing video file within a heavily encrypted digital envelope utilizing a self-destructing one-time-use routing protocol. She transmitted the malicious package directly to Derek's private, highly secure corporate email address, bypassing the firm's standard firewall protections with ease. We watched the live security feed, intently waiting for the notification alert to appear on his primary desktop monitor. Less than 60 seconds later, a bright red envelope icon flashed aggressively across his screen. Derek hesitated for a long moment, staring at the unexpected email from an unknown sender. He cautiously clicked the link, and the distorted video immediately began playing. The color completely drained from his face as he recognized the damaged leather carry-on bag Monica had so carefully packed for my supposed tropical vacation. His jaw dropped in utter disbelief as the camera panned across the 3 encrypted hard drives, providing undeniable proof that his meticulously planned framing operation had catastrophically failed. He slumped forward, gripping the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. The sudden realization that a completely unknown third party possessed the lethal evidence capable of destroying him was visibly crushing his spirit. He grabbed his mobile phone, his fingers shaking violently as he dialed a number. The security feed captured him aggressively, pacing the length of his office, his voice sharp and frantic. He was undoubtedly calling Monica, desperately seeking a logical explanation for the sudden appearance of the blackmail video. I instructed Cypher to actively intercept the cellular transmission, routing the audio feed directly through our terminal speakers. The connection crackled, and Monica's voice filled the warehouse, her tone unnaturally calm and defensive. She immediately denied any knowledge of the intercepted luggage, aggressively insisting that my arrest in the Cayman Islands must have proceeded exactly as planned. Derek's voice rose in pitch, bordering on hysteria as he described the threatening video and the impossible demands for the property deed and $2 million in cash. Monica's response was chillingly calculated. She coldly advised him to ignore the anonymous blackmail, suggesting it was likely a desperate bluff orchestrated by a low-level cartel operative trying to extort additional funds. She actively discouraged him from engaging with the unknown blackmailer, aggressively pushing him to focus entirely on locating the missing $50 million before the Volkov deadline expired. Her blatant disregard for his immediate physical safety confirmed her treacherous intentions. She wanted him completely paralyzed by fear, ensuring he would remain a stationary target for the cartel assassins while she quietly executed her escape plan. Derek abruptly ended the call, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. The seeds of doubt had finally been planted deep within his mind. The terrifying appearance of the blackmail video directly contradicted Monica's arrogant assurances, highlighting the severe cracks in their criminal alliance. The pressure cooker I had carefully constructed was beginning to boil, and the heat was actively forcing him to question the loyalty of the woman he had sacrificed his father to protect. He collapsed back into his chair, staring blankly at the single silver bullet still resting ominously on his desk. He reached a trembling hand toward his computer keyboard, his fingers hovering hesitantly over the keys. The security feed captured him frantically, searching his digital archives, actively attempting to locate the specific legal files containing the original deed to my family home. The sudden realization that the anonymous blackmailer specifically requested a property document previously managed exclusively by his supposedly deceased father triggered a visible, violent shudder across his entire body. The psychological trap was slowly closing around him. I leaned closer to the monitor as the scene in Derek's office descended into primal chaos. Monica burst through the door, her face a mask of furious indignation. The heavy mahogany door had barely clicked shut before she launched into a tirade, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She demanded to know why Derek had summoned her with such aggressive urgency, completely ignoring the sheer terror etched across his pale features. Her expensive handbag hit the floor with a heavy thud, the sharp sound echoing through the tense, silent room. Derek did not immediately respond to her verbal assault. Instead, he simply pointed a trembling finger toward his computer monitor, the screen still illuminating the horrifying blackmail video I had sent. Monica leaned over his shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she watched the footage play. I expected a denial, a frantic attempt to dismiss the anonymous threat as a sophisticated hoax. But as the camera lingered on the sliced open lining of the leather carry, on the color drained from her cheeks, the confident facade cracked, revealing the terrified, cornered animal lurking beneath her polished exterior. She spun around, her voice dropping to a harsh, accusatory whisper. She demanded to know how the blackmailer had obtained the drives, aggressively questioning Derek's competence. Derek's reaction was instantaneous and explosive. He shot out of his chair, the sudden movement causing Monica to stumble backward. He didn't just defend himself. He launched a vicious counterattack. He screamed that she was the one who had packed the bag, that she had insisted on handling the logistics. The accusation hung heavy in the air, a toxic admission of their shared guilt and mutual incompetence. The verbal skirmish rapidly escalated from defensive justifications to outright character assassination. Monica sneered, calling him a pathetic, spineless coward who lacked the stomach for real power. She mocked his inability to manage the offshore accounts, throwing his financial failures directly in his face. Derek retaliated with staggering cruelty. He attacked her vanity, her greed, and her complete dependence on his corporate success to fund her lavish lifestyle. The toxic foundation of their marriage, built entirely on mutual exploitation and criminal ambition, was crumbling before my eyes. The psychological pressure cooker reached its boiling point when Derek mentioned the Volkov Syndicate's brutal ultimatum. He described the silver bullet, the 48-hour deadline, and the undeniable reality that their lives were now forfeit. Monica's sneer vanished, replaced by a sudden rigid stillness. The realization that her brilliant extraction plan had not insulated her from the cartel's wrath hit her like a physical blow. She realized that the syndicate did not distinguish between the visible architect and the hidden thief. They simply wanted their money, and they would butcher anyone connected to the theft. The security feed captured a terrifying shift in Monica's posture. The frantic, accusatory energy evaporated, replaced by cold, calculating desperation. She slowly backed away from Derek, her eyes darting toward the heavy office door. I recognized the subtle shift in her body language. She was mentally calculating her escape route, preparing to abandon him entirely to save herself. Derek recognized it too. The fear in his eyes morphed into sudden, blinding rage. He realized that the woman he had sacrificed his own father for was preparing to leave him to the wolves. He lunged across the room, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. He grabbed her arm roughly, the sudden violence shocking them both. Monica shrieked, struggling frantically to break his grip. The scuffle was clumsy and desperate, fueled by pure panic. She managed to yank her arm free, slapping him hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the office, leaving a bright red welt on Derek's pale cheek. He stumbled backward, his hand flying to his face in stunned disbelief. The physical altercation broke the last remaining thread of their alliance. Monica didn't just back away. She bolted for the door. Derek recovered his balance and lunged after her, managing to grab the back of her expensive jacket, just as she reached the handle. The fabric tore with a loud rip, sending them both tumbling awkwardly to the floor. The chaotic struggle was a pathetic, horrifying display of two people entirely consumed by fear, fighting not for survival, but for the desperate illusion of control. They scrambled apart, panting heavily, the air thick with toxic hatred. The security camera perfectly captured the moment their relationship died completely. They glared at each other not as husband and wife, but as bitter, uncompromising enemies. The shared delusion of criminal mastery had evaporated, leaving only two terrified individuals realizing they had destroyed their lives for absolutely nothing. The blackmail video had perfectly executed its intended psychological purpose, isolating Derek entirely and leaving him terrifyingly vulnerable for the final confrontation at Pier 4. The relentless coastal fog rolling off the dark waters of the harbor swallowed the decaying infrastructure of Pier 4, reducing the towering cargo cranes to skeletal, menacing silhouettes. I stood perfectly still within the deep, impenetrable shadow cast by a rusted shipping container, the biting chill of the midnight air seeping through my heavy coat. The rhythmic hollow slapping of the waves against the wooden pylons provided a grim soundtrack for the impending confrontation. A pair of headlights suddenly pierced the thick mist, erratic, and hurried, announcing Derek's arrival precisely on schedule. He killed the engine of his luxury sedan, the sudden silence amplifying the distant mournful wail of a foghorn. He stepped out of the vehicle, his silhouette sharply defined against the harsh glare of a lone flickering security light. He was clutching a sleek aluminum briefcase tightly against his chest, his posture rigid with absolute terror. He wore a dark hooded jacket pulled low, a pathetic attempt to conceal his identity in a place where no one else was watching. He frantically scanned the desolate pier, his head swiveling erratically at every creak of the rotting wood and every gust of the freezing wind. He was expecting to meet a ruthless, anonymous cyber mercenary, a dangerous individual capable of hijacking a global cartel operation. He expected a monster, and I intended to deliver exactly that. I waited until he had advanced halfway down the wooden pier, intentionally allowing his anxiety to peak before I finally moved. I stepped out from behind the rusted container, deliberately keeping my face obscured by the heavy shadows. My footsteps echoed loudly on the damp planks, a slow, methodical rhythm that instantly froze him in place. He raised a trembling hand, attempting to shield his eyes from the glare of the security light. "I have the money," he stammered, his voice cracking violently in the damp air. "I have the deed. Just give me the drives and we're done." No questions asked. I did not respond immediately, letting the profound silence stretch until it became physically agonizing for him. I took 3 more deliberate steps forward, finally crossing the threshold, separating the deep shadows from the harsh, flickering light. The yellow illumination washed over my face, revealing my features clearly for the first time. The aluminum briefcase slipped from Derek's grasp, hitting the wooden planks with a sharp metallic clang that echoed across the empty harbor. The sheer, unadulterated psychological terror that exploded across his face was a terrifying, deeply satisfying confirmation of his absolute guilt. His knees buckled slightly, his mouth opening and closing in rapid succession, completely incapable of forming a coherent word. He stumbled backward, his hands instinctively reaching out, as if attempting to ward off a physical apparition. "Dad," he finally whispered, the single syllable choked with absolute disbelief and overwhelming dread. He had meticulously orchestrated my death in a foreign prison, and now his supposed victim was standing before him, holding the absolute power of life and death. The arrogant corporate executive had entirely vanished, replaced by a terrified child staring directly into the abyss. I stepped closer, ignoring the dropped briefcase entirely, my gaze locked onto his panicked eyes. I did not offer any paternal comfort or reassuring words. I simply stated with chilling, practiced detachment that his grand, meticulous framing operation in the Cayman Islands had failed catastrophically. I detailed precisely how I had abandoned the flight, discovered the secret compartment in the luggage Monica packed, and systematically traced his digital fingerprints across the forged offshore accounts. I watched the remaining color drain from his face as he realized the anonymous blackmailer holding the cartel's explosive data was not a stranger, but his own betrayed father. He fell to his knees on the damp wood, his hands trembling violently as he reached out toward me. "I didn't want to do it," he sobbed, the tears flowing freely now mixing with the cold fog. "I was forced into it. The cartel threatened me. They said they would kill Monica if I didn't help them." The lie was so transparent, so pathetically constructed, that it fueled my icy resolve. He was still actively attempting to manipulate my emotions, utilizing his wife as a convenient, desperate shield to deflect his own monstrous culpability. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and extracted a thick sheaf of printed documents, holding them up in the dim light. I told him I had already reviewed the comprehensive internal transaction logs, the precise dates of his initial mortgage fraud, and the aggressive liquidation of my entire retirement portfolio. Those specific financial actions had occurred weeks before the Volkov syndicate even entered the equation. He had not been coerced into stealing my money. He had enthusiastically volunteered me as a sacrificial lamb to fund his initial entry into the criminal underworld. The documents fluttered slightly in the cold wind, undeniable physical proof of his profound treachery. I demanded the deed to the Harrison family property, ignoring his pathetic, continued sobbing. He scrambled toward the fallen briefcase, his hands shaking so violently he struggled to unlatch the simple clasps. He finally pulled out the heavy notarized document and held it up to me, his eyes pleading for a mercy he absolutely did not deserve. He begged me to take the $2 million in cash and simply walk away, promising he would disappear and never bother me again. I snatched the deed from his trembling hand, checking the official seal and the property description. The legal document was authentic, finally returning the physical ownership of my home to my control. But the confrontation was far from over. I looked down at my kneeling son, feeling a profound, absolute emptiness where my parental love used to reside. I informed him that the $2 million in the briefcase was completely irrelevant. I had not summoned him to this desolate pier to negotiate a financial settlement. I had brought him here to ensure he understood the exact magnitude of his failure before I completely annihilated the rest of his life. Derek's knees struck the damp wooden planks with a hollow thud. The sharp impact ignored as his physical composure completely disintegrated. He released his frantic grip on the aluminum briefcase, allowing it to slide precariously toward the edge of the pier. The metallic latch snapped open upon hitting a rusted cleat, spilling banded stacks of $100 bills into the murky harbor water below. He did not glance at the sinking fortune, his tear-filled eyes locked desperately onto my face. He clasped his hands together in a pathetic, prayerful gesture, his chest heaving with exaggerated theatrical sobs. The desperate apologies spilled from his mouth in a frantic, unstructured torrent, specifically engineered to shift the crushing weight of culpability. He aggressively pointed his finger back toward the glittering city skyline, actively accusing Monica of orchestrating the entire financial catastrophe. He claimed she had secretly installed spyware on his corporate laptop to bypass authentication protocols. He insisted she independently established the Cayman Island entities, using her specialized legal background, deliberately keeping him entirely blind to the international money laundering infrastructure until it was far too late to safely intervene. When my expression remained impassive, his frantic narrative immediately pivoted toward a much darker, more menacing scapegoat. He vividly described a clandestine meeting in a subterranean parking garage where a towering Volkov syndicate enforcer allegedly pressed a suppressed firearm directly against his temple. He fabricated a chilling, detailed story about the cartel explicitly threatening to brutally torture a non-existent unborn child he claimed Monica was secretly carrying. He framed his treasonous actions as the desperate maneuvers of a terrified family man attempting to shield innocent loved ones from ruthless executioners. I listened to his elaborate weeping performance with the detached clinical observation of a senior auditor reviewing a flawed ledger. The icy sea breeze whipped across the desolate pier, chilling my skin, but it was nothing compared to the frost expanding within my chest. I slowly unbuttoned the front of my heavy wool coat, reaching deliberately into a concealed interior pocket. I extracted a slim, waterproof plastic sleeve containing a highly specific set of authenticated corporate data logs that Mitchell's underground tech specialist had covertly recovered from the deleted server archives. I tossed the first printed page directly onto the wet planks between us, the stark white paper illuminated by the flickering security lamp. The document displayed a meticulously time-stamped digital application for the aggressive reverse mortgage executed against my suburban family home. I pointed a steady accusatory finger at the specific calendar date printed boldly in the upper right corner. The legal authorization had been officially processed on the 14th of October, a full 7 months before he ever attended the corporate networking event where he initially encountered the Volkov representatives. Derek stared at the undeniable timestamp, the manufactured tears abruptly stalling in the corners of his eyes. I methodically presented the subsequent pages, detailing the precise immediate destination of those stolen real estate funds. The money had not been utilized as an involuntary operational deposit for a violent cartel. The capital had been swiftly transferred into a highly volatile, completely unregulated commodities trading account. He had secretly leveraged my entire paid-off property to desperately cover massive margin calls generated by his own reckless, unauthorized gambling on the Asian futures market. His lower lip trembled violently as he attempted to construct a new defensive perimeter, stammering that he was merely trying to aggressively multiply the family estate to ensure generational wealth. I ruthlessly cut off his pathetic justification, dropping a heavily redacted internal email chain directly onto his lap. The communication logs revealed his direct encrypted negotiations with a corrupt official operating within the Interpol regional office. He had not been a passive victim of a random international dragnet. He actively purchased the arrest warrant utilizing the drained balance of my corporate retirement account. The final damning invoice in the stack showed a $500,000 wire transfer labeled as a discreet consulting fee sent directly to a Bahamian shell corporation controlled by the corrupt Interpol director. My son had literally priced my assassination, calculating the monetary cost required to ensure I died swiftly in a foreign holding cell without access to legal representation. The sheer mechanical precision of the transaction proved his betrayal was not born of sudden panic, but from a deeply rooted sociopathic greed that had festered silently for long years. The theatrical facade of the weeping victim instantly evaporated from his features, leaving behind a chilling, hollow stare. His posture shifted the desperate slouch, hardening into a rigid, defiant crouch, as he realized his elaborate web of deception had been fundamentally dismantled. He slowly lowered his hands, wiping the remaining moisture from his cheeks with the back of his expensive wool sleeve. The agonizing realization that his father possessed granular, irrefutable proof of his absolute malice finally extinguished his desperate, manipulative performance. I was utterly exposed under the harsh, flickering amber glow. I stepped forward, my heavy leather shoe planting firmly onto the discarded damp property deed lying on the wooden boards. I looked down at the stranger kneeling before me permanently, severing the biological tether that had bound us together for 4 decades. I coldly informed him that he was no longer my son, stripping away his familial title with the same ruthless efficiency he used to strip away my life savings. I demanded he stand up and face his impending destruction with whatever shred of human dignity he still possessed. A low, throbbing vibration suddenly resonated through the wooden pylons beneath our feet, completely shattering the tense standoff. The heavy hum of a marine diesel engine echoed through the thick coastal fog, steadily approaching our isolated position at the edge of the pier. A massive cargo vessel was cutting through the murky water, slicing silently toward the dilapidated loading dock. The final phase of my carefully orchestrated retribution had officially arrived, bringing a completely unexpected set of consequences that would permanently alter his shrinking reality. The low throbbing vibration of the approaching cargo vessel shook the damp wooden planks beneath my feet, creating a rhythmic physical manifestation of the impending catastrophe. The heavy fog swirling around the dilapidated loading dock began to glow with a sickly industrial orange hue as the massive ship's navigation lights pierced the dense mist. Derek remained frozen in a desperate crouch, staring blankly at his soiled, expensive trousers, clearly expecting the confrontation to end with a negotiated surrender. I stared down at the pathetic figure, the final remnants of my paternal instinct completely extinguished by the sheer magnitude of his betrayal. The time for calculated psychological dismantling was over. It was time to deliver the killing blow. I reached deliberately into the deep inner pocket of my heavy wool coat, my gloved fingers tracing the edge of a secondary waterproof plastic sleeve. I extracted a meticulously compiled dossier that Mitchell's underground tech specialist had covertly recovered from the deeply encrypted hidden directories within the syndicate's server architecture. I did not toss this final set of documents onto the wet planks. I held them firmly in my hand, forcing Derek to raise his tear-streaked face to meet my icy gaze. I informed him with brutal clinical detachment that his entire framing operation was fundamentally flawed, not by his own incompetence, but by deliberate malicious design. I flipped open the first page of the dossier, presenting a highly detailed, authenticated flight manifest, booked securely under a sophisticated corporate alias. I pointed a steady accusatory finger at the 2 first-class one-way tickets to Dubai, scheduled to depart from John F. Kennedy International Airport at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow evening. The primary passenger listed on the exclusive itinerary was Monica Harrison. The secondary passenger, traveling under a verified diplomatic passport, was a man named Julian Vane, a notorious international fixer known for facilitating high-net-worth extractions for the global criminal elite. Derek's eyes widened in profound, genuine confusion, his brain desperately attempting to reconcile the contradictory information. I ruthlessly shattered his remaining cognitive dissonance, explaining that Julian Vane was not merely a logistical asset. He was Monica's secret long-term romantic partner. The comprehensive surveillance logs recovered from the cartel's server revealed an extensive, passionate digital correspondence between the two lovers, detailing a clandestine relationship that predated Derek's initial entry into the money laundering syndicate by several years. My son had not recruited a brilliant legal mastermind. He had been systematically targeted and groomed by a highly sophisticated grifter. I methodically presented the subsequent pages detailing the precise, immediate destination of the $50 million I had successfully siphoned from the offshore accounts earlier that evening. The money had not been originally destined for a secure holding facility. Monica had actively engineered a lethal dead man's switch designed to reroute the entire syndicate fortune directly into a massive, totally impenetrable cryptocurrency vault, controlled exclusively by Julian Vane. The automated extraction algorithm was mathematically timed to execute exactly as her flight to Dubai cleared international airspace, leaving Derek holding the empty volatile accounts. The chilling reality of her ultimate betrayal hit him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the remaining breath out of his lungs. I ruthlessly dissected the final, most terrifying layer of her monstrous scheme, revealing the true purpose of the heavily guarded localized server physically housed directly inside his lavish corporate corner office. Monica had deliberately positioned Derek as the visible architect of the laundering scheme, ensuring the Volkov syndicate would focus their inevitable violent wrath entirely on her naive husband. She fully intended to hand him over to a ruthless death squad, using his agonizing execution as a convenient distraction while she quietly vanished with the stolen fortune. The theatrical facade of the desperate victim instantly evaporated from his features, leaving behind a chilling, hollow stare. His posture shifted, the desperate crouch dissolving into a pathetic, broken slump as the sheer magnitude of his absolute failure finally registered. He had meticulously orchestrated his own father's murder, actively purchasing an international assassination, all to secure a financial empire for a woman who actively despised him. The agonizing realization that his toxic criminal hubris had resulted in his complete manipulation finally extinguished his desperate manipulative performance. He was utterly exposed under the harsh, flickering amber glow. His lower lip trembled violently as a guttural, animalistic wail tore from his throat, echoing loudly across the desolate harbor. He frantically grabbed handfuls of his own wet hair, violently rocking back and forth on the damp planks as his fragile sanity completely shattered. The arrogant corporate executive had entirely vanished, replaced by a terrified child, staring directly into the abyss of his own creation. He had traded his father's life, his professional reputation, and his own soul for an illusion that never truly existed. I did not offer any paternal comfort or reassuring words. I stepped backward deliberately, creating a profound physical distance between us, as the massive cargo vessel finally bumped heavily against the rotting wooden pylons. The deafening screech of stressed metal and splintering wood drowned out his pathetic sobbing, providing a grim-fitting soundtrack for the absolute destruction of his privileged existence. I coldly informed him that the anonymous blackmailer holding the cartel's explosive data was no longer a theoretical threat, I had officially transmitted the fully decrypted financial ledgers directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation 10 minutes before my arrival. The heavy thud of combat boots echoing down the wooden pier abruptly shattered his breakdown. He slowly raised his head, his tear-filled eyes locking onto the dark silhouettes emerging from the thick coastal fog. The final phase of my carefully orchestrated retribution had officially arrived, bringing a completely unexpected set of consequences that would permanently alter his shrinking reality. The trap was sprung, the evidence was delivered, and the executioners were finally here to collect their due. Derek scrambled blindly away from the rapidly approaching tactical team, slipping on the damp wooden planks and nearly tumbling backward into the dark, freezing harbor. He scrambled to his feet and bolted down the length of the pier, his frantic footsteps echoing loudly into the dense fog. He abandoned his luxury sedan, opting instead to disappear into the labyrinth of rusty shipping containers and neglected warehouses. The sheer adrenaline of pure, unadulterated terror fueled his desperate sprint, completely masking the biting cold. He hailed a passing taxi several blocks away from the waterfront, throwing a crumpled stack of wet bills at the driver and screaming the address of his Manhattan penthouse. The terrifying realization of Monica's impending defection burned through his mind with absolute murderous clarity. He visualized her perfectly manicured hands zipping a designer suitcase, completely oblivious to the catastrophic failure of her elaborate extraction scheme. The taxi ride felt agonizingly slow, every red light and traffic jam intensifying his blinding rage. He charged through the polished brass doors of his exclusive apartment building, completely ignoring the startled greeting of the night concierge. He practically leaped into the private elevator, aggressively stabbing the button for the top floor, his chest heaving with erratic, shallow breaths. The elevator doors glided open with a soft chime, and Derek lunged down the short, opulent hallway toward his private residence. He didn't bother using his keycard. He violently kicked the heavy oak door open. The sudden explosive sound shattering the quiet elegance of the penthouse. Monica was standing in the center of the expansive living room, frantically shoving a stack of pristine offshore bearer bonds into a sleek aluminum briefcase. She jumped, letting out a sharp shriek of surprise, the heavy briefcase slipping from her grasp and hitting the plush Persian rug with a muffled thud. Her eyes darted frantically toward the open doorway, clearly not expecting him to return from his supposed execution at Pier 4. Derek did not say a single word. He closed the distance between them with terrifying speed, his hands outstretched like rigid, deadly claws. Monica scrambled backward, stumbling over a packed duffel bag and crashing heavily into a glass coffee table. The expensive crystal shattered instantly, sending a shower of jagged shards across the expensive rug. She screamed again, this time a raw, guttural sound of genuine fear. Derek lunged his fingers, digging brutally into the expensive fabric of her cashmere sweater. He violently hauled her to her feet, shaking her with enough force to snap her neck. He screamed incoherently about Dubai, Julian Vane, and the $50 million she had attempted to steal from the syndicate. Monica didn't try to defend herself with logic or lies. She fought back with primal animalistic desperation. She raked her sharp fingernails deeply across his cheek, leaving 3 bright, bleeding tracks down his pale skin. He roared in pain and fury, shoving her forcefully against the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering city skyline. The heavy reinforced glass shuddered under the impact. Monica scrambled sideways, grabbing a heavy brass sculpture from a nearby pedestal and swinging it wildly toward his head. Derek ducked the heavy metal object, grazing his shoulder, before smashing into the plaster wall behind him. They were locked in a vicious, chaotic struggle, 2 desperate criminals fighting not for survival, but for pure destructive vengeance. The heavy reinforced oak door of the penthouse suddenly exploded inward in a shower of splinters and torn hinges. A blindingly bright, pulsating strobe light flooded the expansive living room, instantly disorienting them both. The deafening, synchronized shouting of heavily armed federal agents filled the chaotic space, aggressively demanding absolute compliance. Red laser sights danced erratically across Derek's chest and Monica's terrified face. They froze, completely paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming display of tactical force. Mitchell Reed stepped through the shattered doorway, his dark eyes scanning the chaotic scene with professional detachment. He was flanked by two heavily armored FBI agents, their assault rifles raised and perfectly steady. Mitchell held up a thick manila folder, the same dossier I had presented to Derek at the pier. He calmly announced that he possessed irrefutable digital evidence directly linking both individuals to massive international money laundering conspiracy and wire fraud. He pointed toward the aluminum briefcase resting amidst the shattered glass, correctly identifying the offshore bearer bonds as crucial physical evidence. Monica attempted a final pathetic maneuver, pointing a trembling finger at her husband and frantically screaming that he was the sole architect of the criminal operation. Derek didn't try to deny the allegations or shift the blame. He simply slumped onto a pristine white sofa, staring blankly at the red lasers dancing across his shirt. The fight had been completely drained from him, replaced by a hollow, profound emptiness. He realized with agonizing clarity that his meticulously constructed corporate empire had been permanently reduced to a pile of shattered glass and federal indictments. The armed agents moved forward swiftly, securing their wrists with heavy plastic zip ties. Mitchell personally secured the aluminum briefcase and the packed duffel bags, meticulously tagging the items for federal processing. He paused briefly in front of Derek, his voice low and devoid of any sympathy. He informed the broken executive that his father was currently under comprehensive federal protection, completely cleared of any involvement in the illicit operation. The devastating finality of Mitchell's statement extinguished the last remaining spark of hope in Derek's eyes. The carefully orchestrated framing operation had officially concluded with a spectacular, uncompromising failure. The federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan felt remarkably cold despite the warm morning sun filtering through the towering glass windows. Judge Eleanor Sterling presided over the heavily guarded courtroom, her voice echoing loudly as she read the staggering list of formal charges into the official judicial record. The prosecution presented an airtight case leveraging the massive digital footprint extracted directly from the decrypted military-grade hard drives. This unprecedented cache of raw financial data triggered an immediate domino effect across global law enforcement agencies. Within 48 hours of the initial raid, Europol executed simultaneous strike operations in 6 different countries, completely paralyzing the Volkov syndicate. High-ranking lieutenants who had evaded capture for decades were pulled from their fortified villas in handcuffs. The international banking community instantly froze over 300 associated shell accounts, permanently severing the financial arteries that had fueled the violent criminal organization. Derek sat at the defense table wearing a shapeless beige prison uniform, looking entirely hollowed out and severely malnourished. His high-priced defense attorneys attempted to negotiate a desperate plea deal by offering to testify against his former handlers. The federal prosecutors aggressively rejected the offer, explicitly stating that the recovered server data had already rendered his insider knowledge completely obsolete. Realizing his absolute lack of leverage, my son turned his legal strategy toward destroying his own wife. He directed his legal counsel to paint him as a helpless victim of a highly sophisticated marital manipulation. He submitted hundreds of pages of digital communication logs, highlighting Monica and Julian Vane, orchestrating the lethal exit strategy. The judge remained entirely unmoved by his frantic attempts to shift the primary culpability. She delivered a merciless, unappealable sentence of 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Monica fared no better in her separate judicial proceedings across the courthouse hall. Her supposed savior and secret romantic partner, Julian Vane, had been apprehended by federal agents at the International Departure Terminal long before his flight to Dubai even boarded. Facing a lifetime behind bars, Julian immediately accepted a comprehensive immunity deal, eagerly testifying against Monica in open court. He systematically laid out her entire cryptocurrency extraction algorithm, detailing exactly how she had planned to siphon the laundered millions into untraceable digital ledgers. Following his devastating testimony, the Cyber Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation successfully accessed her hidden biometric vaults. They seized every single stolen digital asset, effectively reducing her meticulously planned fortune to absolute zero. The judge condemned her profound lack of remorse and sentenced her to 20 years alongside Derek, ensuring they would both rot in separate, highly secure federal facilities for the rest of their natural lives. The devastating legal fallout quickly transitioned into a massive, highly publicized asset forfeiture operation. The United States government seized the luxurious Manhattan penthouse, where the violent arrest had occurred immediately, placing the sprawling property on the federal auction block. The proceeds from the high-profile real estate sale were specifically earmarked for a newly established victims' compensation fund. A fleet of exotic sports cars, extensive collections of designer jewelry, and numerous offshore investment portfolios were systematically liquidated by Treasury agents. The arrogant, opulent lifestyle my son and daughter-in-law had financed entirely through blood money was completely dismantled down to the absolute bare foundations. Every physical trace of their stolen corporate empire was efficiently erased from existence, leaving them with nothing but the standard-issue canvas shoes and thin cotton blankets provided by the harsh federal penal system. My own legal status was officially resolved during a private meeting inside the heavily guarded chambers of the regional district attorney. The lead prosecutor handed me a thick, watermarked document bearing the official seal of the Department of Justice. The comprehensive legal brief formally declared me an unwitting victim of profound identity theft and aggressive financial exploitation. My name, my professional reputation, and my lifelong auditing credentials were fundamentally cleared of any associated criminal wrongdoing. The terrifying international arrest warrants issued by Interpol were permanently expunged from all global law enforcement databases. I was no longer a hunted fugitive forced to hide in the shadows. The federal government officially reinstated my complete access to the domestic banking system, unlocking the various retirement accounts that had been temporarily frozen during the complex ongoing syndicate investigation. Mitchell Reed personally delivered the original notarized deed to my suburban Chicago property, sliding the heavy manila envelope across a polished mahogany conference table. The predatory reverse mortgage that Derek had aggressively secured using his fraudulent power of attorney had been completely nullified by a federal judge. The corrupt banking officials who had knowingly facilitated the illicit residential loan were currently facing their own severe criminal indictments. Holding the crisp, official document in my trembling hands brought a profound, unexpected wave of physical relief. I had successfully reclaimed the physical sanctuary that Patricia and I had spent 30 years lovingly building. The overwhelming nightmare of potential homelessness and total financial ruin had finally evaporated, replaced by the comforting, undeniable certainty of absolute legal ownership. I walked up the familiar concrete driveway of my home later that afternoon. The autumn leaves were scattering across the manicured front lawn, painting the landscape in vibrant shades of gold and crimson. Inserting my brass key into the front door felt like an incredible triumph after enduring so much prolonged darkness. The quiet interior welcomed me with the soothing, familiar scent of old wood and lemon polish. I walked into the sunlit kitchen, filled a kettle with fresh water, and ignited the gas stove. Sitting at the small dining table, I watched the steam rise slowly into the peaceful afternoon air. The chaotic storm of massive betrayal, paralyzing fear, and international crime had finally passed away. My former corporate auditing skills had proven ultimately invaluable against an utterly ruthless adversary. I was truly safe, thoroughly vindicated, and completely free to live my life forever, in absolute beautiful, silent, unwavering harmony, today securely. The heavy brass mail slot on my front door rattled loudly, delivering a thick, certified federal envelope directly onto the polished hardwood floor. I broke the rigid wax seal to find a finalized Treasury Department summary regarding my designated whistleblower compensation. The government had officially awarded me an unprecedented 22% of the seized cartel assets. They instantly transferred a staggering $89 million into my newly secured biometric accounts. This massive influx of clean, legitimate capital provided me with absolute financial invulnerability against any future corporate threats. I immediately hired an elite landscaping firm to completely bulldoze the sprawling backyard, physically uprooting the dying oak trees Derek had planted during his teenage years. A team of skilled contractors replaced the stagnant soil with vibrant flowering. Japanese maples and a cascading stone waterfall, constructing a tranquil meditation garden. The aggressive physical transformation of the property successfully purged the lingering toxic memories of my treacherous son. This newly engineered outdoor sanctuary represented a definitive physical boundary between my agonizing past and my highly promising future. Later that morning, I met Sarah Jenkins at a quiet upscale cafe located near the downtown Aviation Academy. She handed me a crisp acceptance letter from a prestigious commercial piloting program, a lifelong dream she previously could not afford. I slid a certified cashier check across the table covering her entire tuition, housing, and living expenses for the next 4 years. This silent, unrecorded financial gift served as a tangible reward for her immense bravery. Her courageous warning on that airplane had completely prevented my catastrophic demise. My legal team finalized the incorporation documents for the Phoenix Shield Foundation, a privately funded organization designed to exclusively combat elder financial abuse. I endowed the charity with an initial $30 million, hiring a team of ruthless forensic accountants to proactively hunt down predators targeting vulnerable seniors. The foundation operated with lethal efficiency, immediately initiating massive civil lawsuits against 12 predatory nursing home administrators. We actively seized the assets of corrupt legal guardians, aggressively redistributing the recovered wealth directly back to the destitute, manipulated elderly victims. Mitchell Reed parked his dark blue sedan in my newly paved driveway, carrying 2 steaming cups of artisanal dark roast coffee. He handed me a heavily redacted intelligence briefing, confirming that the remaining Volkov Syndicate leadership had unanimously accepted federal plea deals. The international criminal network was officially extinct, completely eradicated from the global financial system due to the microscopic digital vulnerabilities we had aggressively exploited. This classified document guaranteed that no lingering cartel associates would ever attempt to seek violent retribution against me or my allies. A local animal rescue agency arrived shortly after Mitchell's departure, delivering a retired racing greyhound named Barnaby. The gentle, quiet animal cautiously explored the sunlit living room, his rhythmic footsteps breaking the oppressive silence that had plagued the house since Patricia's death. Providing a safe, comfortable sanctuary for the traumatized dog brought a profound, unexpected warmth to the empty corridors. His calm, unwavering loyalty offered a stark, beautiful contrast to the sociopathic, calculated deception I had recently endured from my own immediate biological family members. I sat at my mahogany desk and signed a final irrevocable corporate dissolution agreement permanently severing my legal name from Derek's former financial firm. The signature officially transferred my remaining shares to an anonymous holding company, ensuring the Harrison surname would never again be associated with the disgraced Manhattan hedge fund. The satisfying stroke of my fountain pen effectively erased the last remaining physical tether to my former life. I officially retired my accounting credentials, permanently closing the door on 4 decades of stressful corporate auditing work. I purchased a customized armored recreational vehicle equipped with state-of-the-art satellite communication systems and off-grid solar generators. The massive, luxurious vehicle provided me with the ultimate capability to travel anonymously across the rugged North American landscape. I meticulously plotted a comprehensive route through the remote Pacific Northwest, eager to explore the towering redwood forests and isolated coastal highways. This nomadic freedom represented the ultimate victory over the dark, suffocating prison cell that Derek had so ruthlessly designed and reserved for my final days. Stepping out onto the wraparound porch, I settled into a comfortable rocking chair alongside Barnaby, who rested his head heavily upon my knee. The vibrant golden hues of the early morning sunrise began to crest over the quiet suburban horizon, bathing the newly planted meditation garden in a warm, promising light. I slowly sipped the dark coffee, savoring the crisp, clean air filling my lungs. The relentless, suffocating terror of the past few weeks had entirely evaporated, replaced by an unshakable, profound serenity. I had confronted the ultimate darkness lurking within my own family tree and successfully excised the malignant tumor before it could fatally consume me. The absolute peaceful silence surrounding my secure, beautiful home was no longer a haunting, painful reminder of my profound loss. Instead, it had magically transformed into a gorgeous, exceptionally hard-earned symphony of complete, unfiltered freedom that I would fiercely protect for the rest of my natural days ahead. Family is often considered our safest harbor, but blood does not guarantee loyalty or morality. When greed infects the hearts of those we trust most, we must be willing to open our eyes to the painful truth. Betrayal from a loved one hurts deeper than any other wound, yet it also strips away illusions. True strength is not blindly forgiving toxic behavior, but having the absolute courage to set unbreakable boundaries, demand justice, and walk away from abusers. You must be your own fierce protector. Life's greatest peace arrives when you finally remove the toxic elements from your inner circle. Did this story of ultimate betrayal and justice resonate with you? Please hit the like button to help support the channel. Subscribe so you never miss our upcoming thrilling stories. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now and what would you do in Richard's shoes?